Happy Halloween, gentle listeners, and welcome back to the final terrifying tales from the Library of the Living Red. My name is Erin, and I will be your storykeeper this evening. For tonight's stories, as a special Halloween treat, we have two very special urban legends from our very own Massachusetts. The first from Westboro, and the second from Worcester, not too very far away. Our first tale is The Missing Bride. Enjoy. The village was astir long before the first rays of the midsummer sunrise beamed through the treetops and flickered across the rippling waters of the lake. Giggling girls and beaming women were cooking up a great feast, and the nervous young chief Sassacus was pacing back and forth inside his home, while his mother followed him around and fussed over his wedding clothes. In all the hustle and bustle, no one noticed the beautiful young bride, Iano, slipping out of the village and heading towards the glittering waters of the lake. She was both nervous and excited, and wished to take a paddle in her canoe to calm her pre-wedding jitters. And no one noticed Wakotesh, her rejected suitor, quietly following her in his own canoe. It was only when a few of Ayano's friends and family came to help her dress for her wedding that the bride was found to be missing. No one was unduly alarmed, for Ayano loved to play hide-and-seek with her beloved chief, and everyone assumed she was waiting for him to hunt her down and swing her up in his arms, as he always did when he found her. Chuckling to himself, Sassacus checked all the usual hiding places, but to no avail. As the day wore on, he became alarmed. A serious search was made, and a canoe was found missing. Into the hubbub came Wakotesh, a mighty panther slung across his shoulders that he had hunted down and killed as a present for the chief and his bride. Casting the cat aside, he joined the hunt, expressing every bit as much alarm as the chief himself. But Ayano was nowhere to be found. For 2 long days the tribesmen searched, and the women wept and kept watch. At the end of the 2nd day, the body of Ayano was taken from the lake by a weeping Sassacus. All the tribe gathered to mourn the passage of the fair maiden, and none wept louder or more convincingly than Wakotesh. As for the chief, he stood ashen-faced and shaking at the graveside, and collapsed a few days later, so stricken was his heart. Wakotesh, the mighty hunter, stayed steadfastly by the side of the ailing chief. When Sassacus succumbed to his illness at week's end, Wakotesh stumbled forth from the sickbed, wailing mightily, and blamed himself for failing to save the life of his chief. After observing the death rites for their fallen leader, the tribe elected Wakotesh to be the new chief, and he modestly accepted the honor. The time of mourning soon ended, and life went on as usual in the village. The pain of Sassacus and Ayano's son passing was put aside in the face of the daily activities of the tribe, and the pair were spoken of infrequently. In midsummer of the following year, Wakotesh was standing idly on the shore of the lake, when he saw a mighty flame spring up at the very center. He stared at it in astonishment and fear, raised the hair on his arms, and sent shivers crawling alongside the back of his neck. At that moment, a canoe materialized beside the flame and came racing across the waters toward the stunned warrior. Before he could blink, it was bobbing in the shallow waters next to him. A cold breeze swept around Wakotesh and seized his arms and legs, propelling him forward toward the canoe. As his feet splashed into the shallow waters, he fought the compulsion, struggling against the wind that forced him forward. But it was too strong, and it toppled him into the canoe in an instant. By the time he righted himself, he was skimming across the lake towards the flickering fire. The canoe stopped right in front of the flames, which grew stronger and taller until they towered over him, taking on the glowing aspect of Ayano. Wakota shrieked in terror and cowered at the bottom of the canoe. The flaming figure of the missing bride reached down toward him, and he blacked out. When he awoke, he found himself lying half in and half out of the water on the shore. Wakotish leapt to his feet with a yelp and ran towards the village. At the outskirts he paused, took a deep breath, and sauntered towards his wigwam as if nothing had happened. It was only inside that he realized that it was exactly 1 year ago that Ayano had drowned. He shuddered once from head to toe, and then pushed the incident out of his mind. Another year passed, and the village prospered under the leadership of Wakotish. Many of the eligible girls vied for his attention, but he chose none to be his bride. As midsummer approached again, Wakotish grew moody and silent. Something seemed to be weighing on his mind, but no one could discover what it was. On the anniversary of Ayano's death, Wakotish went hunting in the opposite direction of the lake, wanting no more visions or strange occurrences to haunt him. Yet this mighty hunter suddenly found himself lost in the woods he had known all his life. He circled around and around, unable to find his way. When he burst forth at last from the underbrush, he was on the shores of the lake near his village, and in the center of the lake he saw the mighty flaming figure of Ayano. Wakotish was not surprised when a black canoe appeared out of nowhere and whooshed across the lake to bob before him. He was not surprised when a cold wind whipped around him and thrust him unceremoniously into the boat. He had lived through all of this before. When he reached the center of the lake, the massive flaming figure of Ayano bent down over him and said, "Only one time more." Wakotish stared up the flaming figure, mesmerized, his head swimming. He was not aware of losing consciousness, but he must have, for his next waking memory was of lying on the shore with his feet in the water and his head pillowed on a rock. He sat up slowly, trembling in fear. With a heavy heart, he made his way home. The next year did not go well for the village. Wakotish was too preoccupied to participate in the councils, and he rarely hunted or fished. He grew thin and weak and withdrew into himself, snapping at friends and family alike. No one could discover what ailed him. As midsummer grew closer, Wakotish retreated completely and refused to come out of his wigwam. Everyone in the village was alarmed and fearful, and no one knew what to do. Then, on Midsummer Day, Wakotish appeared suddenly in the doorway and called out loudly for his people to gather. Wondering, uneasy, the villagers came to him, and the chief held his hands up for silence. "Today is my death day," he announced, and waited to continue until the startled murmurs died away. 3 years ago, I followed Ayano when she paddled her canoe across the lake in the early morning of her wedding day. I was jealous and bitter at losing her to another, so I tipped her canoe over and left her to drown. Then, when Sasakus, your chief, fell ill, I poisoned him and let him die." There were gasps of outrage from his people, but he waved them silent. "The time has come. Today I will pay for my deeds. See there," he added, pointing towards the lake. "The spirit of Ayano comes for me." Everyone saw a mighty pillar of flame burst forward from the waters of the lake. Wakotish stepped along among his people, and they shied away from him superstitiously as he marched toward the shore of the lake. The black canoe zipped across the water and bobbed in the shallows. Without a murmur, Wakotish allowed the breeze to sweep him inside, and his people watched as the canoe rushed forward, carrying their chief towards the flaming figure of Ayano. As Wakotish reached the place where Ayano had drowned, a massive bolt of lightning crashed down from the heavens and enveloped the canoe in light. The clap of thunder that followed it flattened all those who had followed their chief to the shore. When they stumbled, trembling to their feet, the canoe containing Wakotish was gone. From that day forward, the villagers carried small stones with them when they crossed the lake, and were careful to drop them at the place where Wakotish died, as a memorial to appease the spirits of the dead who haunted their location. The memorial pillar can still be seen today on the bottom of the lake to this day. We have one more story for you tonight, gentle listeners. As I said, a Halloween treat. Our last story comes to us from Worcester. It is titled Nighe. I hurried through the grass and down the slope towards the stream, as the afternoon sun made the shadows dance around me, and the wind soughed through the tall oak trees with a mournful sigh. My shoes crunched across the gravel drive, and then took the steep trail that led to my favorite retreat. The path wound through the copse of trees where the stream meandered and bubbled. I could hear the rushing of the water as I climbed over a fallen birch tree. As my feet hit the large rock on the other side, I glanced down towards the rushing stream and smiled. The sound of flowing water always relaxed me, and I needed to relax. Things were not going well at home. I climbed down the last few feet and perched on a giant rock at water's edge. Pulling my knees up to my chest for comfort, I wrapped my arms around them. Then I unwrapped one arm long enough to wiggle a peppermint stick out of the pocket of my skirt. Popping the end in my mouth, I gazed down at the sunlight dappling the water through the branches and leaves of the thick trees overhead. Tiny little fish were darting to and fro in the large, calm pool to the left of the rock. To the right of my perch, the stream grew shallow, and the water tripped happily over small stones. In my mind, I was not seeing the stream. I was seeing Papa's face when the grim midwife told him to ride for the doctor. I was hearing the horse's hooves pounding the gravel as he rode down the drive. I was seeing Annie, the escaped slave girl whom we were assisting on her way to Canada, taking my little brother Timothy by the hand and walking with him down the lane to stay with our neighbors while Mama had her baby. And my ears rang with Mama's agonized screaming, which had driven me out of the house and down to this quiet spot. I didn't want to think about Mama and the new baby we were so all eager to see. So I thought about Annie and how she had come to our house, which one of the northern stations on the northern upper underground railroad, hungry and tired and weary from months of hiding and walking north. She had seen the signal we'd set out on our gate and come to the door for food and shelter. Mama had welcomed her with open arms, and Annie, even in her exhausted state, had seen what my brother and I were too little to see, that Mama was very ill with this last pregnancy and should not be on her feet. By the time Papa got home that night, Mama was resting on the settee, and Annie and I were baking cookies in the kitchen while my little brother supervised and did the taste testing. Papa was so relieved to see Mama at rest. The doctor was worried about her, but we were too poor to hire help, aside from a village girl who came once a week to help Mama with heavy work like laundry and cleaning. Papa rode out at once to make discreet inquiries to see if Annie was being seriously pursued by the authorities. To his relief, he saw no signs or rumors of pursuit. Upon hearing this, Annie herself decided it was safe to stay with us and help Mama for a few weeks until the baby was born, in exchange for rest and shelter and a safe passage to Canada. Papa told everyone in town that Annie had come from Boston to work for us. Folks accepted the story without question and welcomed Annie into our tight-knit abolitionist community as mother's helper and friend. I don't know how long I sat there, watching the shadows grow longer and listening to the stream murmuring to itself. I didn't turn my head when I heard soft footsteps coming down the path, and I kept my eyes firmly on the moving water when Annie slipped into the stone beside me. "Your Papa is looking for you," she said. I thrust my lip forward to keep it from trembling. "He wants to talk to you." "I already know," I said, but dropping my head into my arms to hide my trembling mouth. "The doctor didn't get here in time, did he?" "No, Carrie, he didn't," Annie said softly, touching my black curls with a tender hand. "I'm so sorry. Your Mama is in heaven now, with your new baby brother." She took me in her arms then, and let me cry for my poor dead Mama and the tiny little brother I would never know. Then she took my hand, and we went up to the house where my blue-eyed Papa was acting dazed and lost. Little Timothy had been left at the neighbor's house while arrangements were made for the wake and funeral. The next 2 days were a blur to me. People kept coming to the house to weep and wail and hold us poor, motherless children. Papa's eyes had lost their twinkle, and he kept twisting his fingers in his curly dark beard and tugging on it until it must have hurt. Timothy wept all the time and kept calling for Mama. He thought she had gone to the village and would be back any moment. It was awful. The worst part was the emptiness in that house full of people, an emptiness that could only be filled by one person. And she was gone. Annie was a tower of strength in the midst of our pain. She and my grandmother prepared for the food, helped Papa with the funeral arrangements, and washed and dressed my poor Mama's body. She and my tiny brother were laid in an open casket in the sitting room, and all our friends and neighbors came and wept over her. Since I was only 8 and couldn't help much with the wake, I was put in charge of Timothy and did everything I could to distract him. He kept running into the sitting room and trying to climb into the casket with Mama, so Papa sent us outside to play. As if I could play. There was such a weight on my chest that I could barely breathe, and I wanted to cry, but I couldn't push the tears past the knot in my throat. The next morning the casket was placed in our carriage and driven first to the church and then to the graveyard next door. Timothy and I stood with Papa and Annie and my grandparents while the minister talked about heaven, how beautiful it was, and how happy Mama would be in that lovely place. I was fine until the moment they lowered the casket into the ground. That's when I fully realized that Mama wasn't coming back ever again. I screamed and tried to grab the rope and pull her back up. Papa quickly caught me up in his arms and carried me away, sobbing my heart out. When we got home, the house filled once again with visitors. Grandma and Annie went into action at once, rushing into the kitchen to put our food and accepting gifts of flowers and desserts and toys for me and Timothy. Papa wasn't quite able to cope with it all, and Grandma sent him out to take a walk by the stream until he regained his composure. A few minutes later, Papa came bursting through the back door, his blue eyes wild with some emotion I didn't understand. He called to my grandfather to come with him, and Grandfather went without any question. Annie and Grandma were puzzled but didn't say anything. I don't think they wanted to frighten Timothy and me. Papa and Grandfather came back about a half an hour later. Papa slipped into the sitting room almost immediately to greet the gathered friends and neighbors, but Grandfather stopped in the kitchen to talk to Grandma and Annie. They spoke in low tones, and I couldn't hear what they were saying. Whatever it was made wrinkles of pain and worry crease Grandma's face, and Annie's happy mouth became a grim line. After the guests had left and Grandma and Grandpa departed, taking my little brother to spend the night at their place, Papa took me aside and told me that I was no longer allowed to play by the stream. When I protested, he said, "I'm sorry, little love, but I forbid it. You will listen to me in this matter." And that was that. I stormed and cried and protested, but he just gave a weary sigh, covered his eyes with a trembling hand, and asked Annie to put me to bed. This final statement took my breath away. Every night for my whole life, Papa had tucked me into bed and kissed me goodnight. And tonight, of all nights, when my poor Mama lay under the ground with my dead brother, he was abandoning his lifelong task. I broke into sobs and wailed on Annie's shoulder as she carried me upstairs, put me into my nightgown, and tucked me into bed. It was summer and still light outside. I lay for a while looking at the ceiling and fuming about how unfair Papa was. Then I did something that was unusual for an obedient child like me. Heartsick and overtired, I slipped out of my bed, threw on a dressing gown and slippers, and went down the back staircase and out into the yard. I didn't know why they wanted me to stay away from my favorite play spot, and at that minute, I didn't care. God had already taken my Mama from me and the new baby that we had all wanted so badly. To also deprive me of my special retreat was the height of cruelty to my 8-year-old mind. I marched through the grass and down the slope towards the stream as the setting sun deepened the shadows around me, and the wind whisked around through the tall oak trees with a mournful sound, almost like that of the weeping and wailing I'd heard all afternoon at the house. I wanted to weep and wail myself, for I missed my Mama so badly. "Come back, Mama," I whispered aloud, as if my slippers crunched across the gravel path, and I took the steep, winding trail that led to my favorite retreat. The trail was dark and eerie. Dusk had already fallen among the copse of trees, where the stream meandered and bubbled. I could hear the rushing of the water as I climbed over the fallen birch tree. As my feet hit the large rock on the other side, I peered through the gloom towards the rushing stream. And I saw her, my mama. She was kneeling at the edge of the water with a tiny baby shirt in her hand. She was scrubbing at it with a tart brush, washing it clean. I had seen her scrubbing our clothes thus 100 times or more, but never by the stream. Always at the house, in the big wash tub, with the help of the neighbor girl Papa had hired to assist my poor overworked Mama with the chores once a week. "Mama!" I shouted, breaking into a run at the sight of her. My heart pounded with joy and relief. They'd gotten it wrong. Papa, the doctor, Annie, the minister. They'd gotten it wrong. Mama wasn't dead. She was right here. Mama turned her head at the sound of my voice, and I froze in my tracks, one foot still lifted. Her eyes glowed blue-green in their sockets, and her nose only had one nostril. Her face and hands were gray and hollow, with dark veins popping out here and there. She looked as if she had been dead for a long time, not just 2 days. One tooth was visible through her withered lips, and her torso was as twisted and dried as her lips. The baby shirt she held in one hand was full of blood, as was the brush she held in the other, and the water of the merry bubbling stream was swirling red with blood too. My horrified gaze went to the basket of baby clothes beside her, laying damp and stained in an ever-expanding pool of blood. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream or wail or hide my eyes. I just stood there and stared at the hideous, warped representation of my beloved Mama and wanted to be sick. But I couldn't even throw up. Our eyes remained locked together for a long moment. Then Mama lifted her hand, holding the scrub brush, and beckoned to me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt my ribs, but I had to go to her. I had to. This was my mother. Then I heard a voice. Oh no, Miss O'Toole. You already have one child with you. You don't need another. It was a clear voice of Annie, speaking from somewhere behind me. I felt the slave girl's arms fling themselves around my small body, and she swung me up as if I weighed nothing at all. Her touch broke the spell I was under. I gasped desperately, once, twice, and then threw up all over poor Annie. She bore it stoically and held me, sick and tired and covered with the disgusting remains of my dinner, and I sobbed and sobbed my heart out in her arms. Somehow, I knew that my mom was no longer washing clothes by the stream, though I didn't turn and look as Annie carried me back to the house. We told you not to go down there, Carrie, Annie said, scolding me gently as she cleaned me up and tucked me back into bed. But I knew you would. Stubborn, that's what you are. She wiped away a few more tears from my cheeks. I don't understand, I wailed suddenly, all pent-up emotion coming out of me in a high-pitched sob. You said Mama went to heaven, but she's down by the creek, and she's... I couldn't go on. At that moment, the door to my room burst open, and Papa came in, dark hair disheveled, blue eyes over his curly dark beard. He nodded to Annie, who left the room quietly, and then he knelt beside my bed and took me into his huge arms. I broke into sobs again, and Papa cried with me. When we had both calmed down a little, I whispered, I don't understand, Papa. Why isn't Mama in heaven? Oh, my little love, I would have spared you this, Papa groaned into my black curls. It happens this way sometimes, when an Irish woman dies in childbirth near a stream. Sometimes her ghost returns, as it be Nighe, a little washer by the stream. Some strange compulsion forces the ghost to wash and wash the clothes of the child she lost, as if erasing the blood will erase the event and bring the child back to life. According to your grandfather, the being Nighe will continue washing the clothes, both those of the dead child and of all those who die in this place, for the rest of the days she would have lived if childbirth had not claimed her before her time. Only when she reaches the day that she would have died of natural causes is she released to heaven. I gave a great gasp of relief when I heard that Mama would someday go to heaven. I was so afraid that I would never see her again. The real her, I mean, not the strange creature with that face now washed in vain down by the stream. We will be leaving this place, Carrie, Papa continued after a long pause. It is not fair to you or Timothy or me to stay here where we can see the bean Nighe by the creek. Your grandmother will take us in for the present, until I can sell the house and find a new place to live. I nodded my head and lay my head against his chest uncertainly. I did not want to see the creature with Mamma's face again, and yet it hurt me deep inside to leave it all alone by the creek. Can Annie come with us? I asked finally, in a tiny voice, rubbing my wet cheeks with the back of my hand. Annie is coming with us, Papa said, and I thought I heard a smile in his voice. She will help take care of you at Grandma's house, and next week you and Timothy and I will all drive her up to Canada, where she can be a free woman at last. I lifted my head and gave him a watery smile. That would make Mamma glad, I said. He choked a bit and nodded. Yes, it would, he replied. Then he kissed me and tucked me into bed. I waited until he left to tiptoe to the window and peer down toward the stream. The yard and woods were dark now, and I could see nothing save the light from the kitchen window before me. But in my mind I saw the bean Nighe, down at the stream, washing and washing for all the years of her normal lifespan. At that moment, I decided I wouldn't think of the bean Nighe as Mamma. My Mamma was dead and gone. If something was compelling her spirit to linger here at the stream, it would not hold her forever, and I would see her again someday. That thought brought me some peace, and so I turned away from the window and climbed into bed, able to sleep at last. Happy Halloween.